All right, we are live. This is Live with Sondra. And before I get started with today's show, I got to tell you guys something kind of personal. I had a minor surgery 2 days ago on my shoulder. So I only mention that because I want you to know that I genuinely love being here with you. And if I'm moving a little slower or funny now, you know why. But I do love doing this show. I love these conversations and I really love the Live with Sondra community that we've built here. So when I woke up today, I knew this is exactly where I wanted to be, right here, talking with all of you. And I'm especially glad I showed up for today's conversation because we are talking about something every attraction operator wants to understand. What do consumers actually want right now? Not what we think they want, not what they wanted 5 years ago, what the data tells us they want in 2026. How are people spending their leisure dollars? How are they responding to pricing? What do they actually think about dynamic pricing? And with AI showing up everywhere in the market, is it actually helping us understand and convert guests better? Or are we just using it because we were supposed to? Today, we're going to look at the data. All right, welcome to Live with Sondra. I'm your host, Sondra Shannon, CEO of Gatemaster Technology. And before we jump in, I'd like to thank our sponsor for today's show, Gatemaster Technology. And for more than 30 years, we've helped attractions simplify operations, improve guest experience, and grow their businesses through technology. And one of the reasons today's conversations is so important to me is that our industry has access to more data than we've ever had before. We're talking ticketing data, purchase behavior, visitation patterns, food and beverage, retail, memberships, guest history. But having data and actually knowing what to do with it are two very different things. That's exactly where today's conversation begins. But first, a quick shout out to everyone out there listening to the Live with Sondra podcast. I love having you as part of this community too. And if you are watching on YouTube, please like this episode and subscribe to the new Live with Sondra YouTube channel. Now, let's meet Stephen. Stephen Davis is the managing partner at Integrated Insights, Inc., where his team helps organizations turn customer intelligence into actual business strategy. Stephen recently led the team behind the 2026 Leisure Consumer Survey, looking at how consumer behavior is changing around leisure spending, pricing, marketing, and AI, which means I have a lot of questions for Stephen. And apparently, when Stephen isn't analyzing consumer behavior, he's hanging out with Luna, his Weimaraner, who he says is the one thing he can't live without. Stephen, welcome to Live with Sondra.
Thank you, Sondra. Happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I appreciate you. And we're going to have to talk more about Luna here. And I have a little bit of a lightning round at the end, but I know our audience is super excited probably to hear from you about what consumers actually want. So are you okay if I start with a big question?
Please.
All right. Well, you just completed the 2026 Leisure Consumer Survey. What did the consumers tell you that genuinely surprised you the most?
So there's a lot to digest in there. I think there's probably three things though that came out on top. One is, and it's not a surprise, but it's an interesting validation of they're doing less. So a higher percentage of consumers told us that they did less paid activities in the last 12 months. When we first did this study last year, consumers told us they had intentions to do less, particularly consumers in those like lower to middle incomes, particularly younger consumers that don't have children in the household. And then we came in this year, asked the same set of questions, and we were validated that they are actually intentionally doing less. And then among those that are participating still in the leisure economy, they're doing a little less too. Now, what's interesting about it, though, I think, is that what we're seeing is this extension of what a lot of people have probably heard about, this K-shaped economy phenomenon, where higher income, more affluent households are willing to do more, telling us they're doing more. They want to buy those premium upsells. They want to see front of the line access. They want all of it, right? Whereas
Yeah.
lower income households are telling us more around, I'm pulling back, I'm cautious, I'm not feeling as good about my finances. And so this kind of adverse reaction for those households, it makes it so that you have to be a little more creative to keep them into the fold. But I think, the fact that people are doing less, the number two would be the rapid adoption of AI in leisure planning. So the percent of people who are using AI in terms of getting recommendations on what to do and building itineraries has really like tripled among some segments in the last year. And that was quite shocking. I think, it's something we see, we know it, we're doing it, we're all doing it, I think, in conversation anecdotally. But when you see those really huge shifts in terms of rapid adoption in the data, it's always a little bit of a shock. And then the last thing would probably be the intense amount of competition that in home entertainment is giving out of home entertainment. These leisure consumers are probably what I would consider highly subscribed individuals. They have all the streaming services, they're paying for premium AI access, they're doing online sports gambling. So all of this kind of screen time element and how that's working into people's, budget as it relates to wallet and it relates to time. But those are probably the top three kind of surprising components that we saw come
Yeah,
out.
that's very interesting. You know, I'm curious of all the things that you've mentioned, and maybe there's something else too. What do you think? We're talking about attractions, so attractions being our largest audience on this show. What do you think they need to pay the most attention to?
I think value proposition right now is really critical. One of the primary barriers that we're seeing among people from doing more leisure experiences, from visiting attractions more often, to going to FECs more often, to getting out, taking the family to the zoo, is really the overall cost to visit. I think years back, ticket item itself was more of a lightning rod, whereas now I think more so as things have become more expensive across the spectrum of everything that you pay for related to an attraction experience, consumers are really thinking about the overall cost to visit. And so it's really how are you approaching your value proposition is really critical right now, whether you're no matter where you are on that spectrum from local to destination attraction, your value proposition right now in today's market is really critical.
And that's interesting because no, even if you're in that premium spend group, right? Or the group that's spending less, I think the value proposition sounds like it's important to both groups.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah, and there is some of that. There's a little bit of psychology around if I spend more for something, I want to believe that it was better than maybe it really was. But I think that's where you get into kind of more of the ultra premium kind of offerings. But I think, yeah, the value proposition matters regardless of who you are, because I think if you're building a smart pricing strategy, you're leveraging some amount of price stratification, right? You're really trying to pull people up that price curve. That's what we try to do as revenue optimizers when it comes to
Yeah.
operating attractions. And so that price value all along that curve really matters. That value proposition all along that curve really matters, regardless of who the consumer is.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. So you've mentioned that some consumers are spending less. Or do you believe that it's simply becoming trying to think about how to ask this. Do you believe that they're becoming maybe a little more selective about how they're spending versus spending less? Because you also mentioned that, these are people who are subscribed to so many things.
Right. Yeah, I think that it depends on where you're falling, right, in that economic spectrum of how you feel about your finances right
Yeah.
now. Um, but I think that it's a little bit of both. I think that there's a portion of the economy that's tightening their wallet, right, and they're saying, as wages haven't grown with a certain level of the economy relative to inflation and that kind of pressure that puts on lower to middle income households, they are having to effectively do less. And so that means, I think, as a result of that, they're being more selective about what they do and what they spend their dollars on, um, particularly for that segment of younger adults without children in the household, and those income brackets, like specifically in like the 35 to $75,000 range.
Okay. Well, that actually makes that a little bit more clear. And I also want to understand and maybe have a little more clarity on, what does value actually mean to today's consumer? So when you're looking at a value proposition, is it that they want more for what they're spending? Or I know you kind of mentioned, like, in the case of those who are buying these premium offers, they like to think they're getting more for what they're spending. But what does that value actually mean to today's consumers?
Yeah, I think that's tough. I think it's certainly attraction dependent, right? But I
Sure.
think it's about messaging more than just a price. I think it's about how do you pull emotive factors into the way that you speak to consumers so that price becomes more than just a number, right? It's a reference point that they can get their head around and feel comfortable with. But it's about how are you speaking to those consumers? How are you marketing to those consumers to give them a sense to put them in the experience? Hey, you're creating memories for your children, or hey, you're creating memories for yourself. I think it's really about how you're talking to your consumer about the breadth of your experience. I tell you, one of the things that shocks me most often is when we go out and we do a lot of feasibility and concept research, both for new expansions as well as existing attractions. And one of the things we see a lot is that even among people who told us, yeah, I've heard of that attraction before, when we explain actually everything that the attraction has to offer, a meaningful portion of the market will tell us there's actually more there than I thought there was. And we see that
Mm,
time after time. And so I think the other aspect of value proposition that maybe sometimes gets underlooked is, are you really given the breadth of the full experience of everything you have to offer? Have you really inventoried your kind of your moments across your experience and across your attraction in a way that you can kind of fully explain to your potential guest?
yeah, I love that. Actually, I really love that. Working in what we do in ticketing and point of sale, there's a lot to be said about how we present that first buying experience.
Oh yeah.
And what we see in the data, which is interesting because of what you're saying, is we do see an immediate increase in the shopping cart just simply by telling them more about the experience.
Yeah.
That's it. And they're happier. They're more, even if they don't go for the premium priced item, they're happier because they understand what their options were.
Yeah. And then I think it's just about, delivering right on
Yeah.
that experience that you put in front of them. Right.
Yeah. Well, so that actually makes me want to talk a little bit more about pricing, because, this has become a huge conversation across attractions. In fact, I even heard, and I don't believe that this will ever happen, but I even heard that in the US from a friend of mine that there are parks even considering eliminating the gate ticket, right? Or the price at the gate. So, we know that operators are dealing with much higher labor costs, higher operating costs, and the consumers are paying attention to every dollar, as you mentioned. At the same time, we're seeing dynamic pricing. And I'm curious, what is the research that you're seeing that you see tell us about how consumers actually feel about dynamic pricing? And this is a hot conversation
Yeah,
for me because
yeah,
this is a hot button for a lot of people. So I'm curious. Like, listen. I was waiting for this question this entire like as soon as I knew you were coming on the show.
yeah. So this is another element I think that surprised us, but younger consumers specifically are becoming more accepting of dynamic pricing practices. And the way we asked that was that we explained what dynamic pricing was and said, how do you view this, right? Because we did give them some language around like it enhances flexibility, but the price may change and you don't know about planning. So, um, and all that's included in the report and the wording of exactly how we teed it up. But I think what we saw was that younger consumers were more accepting of dynamic pricing as a strategy. Now, what I would say, and kind of my hot take on dynamic pricing, is that I've seen dynamic pricing work and give good results, and I've seen dynamic pricing fail to deliver good results. And I think the instances where I've seen dynamic pricing be successful, some of that had to do with giving attractions the confidence to take pricing. They needed someone to come in and do the math for them and say, you can take pricing. And a lot of times that gives you that initial pop over those first 2 to 3 years. And then the question becomes, how sustained can that go? I've seen variable pricing strategies. And by variable, I mean different price points, but they're static once they're published, right? They're not changing and fluctuating day to day by 25 cents, 50 cents, 75 cents here and there. They're more
Sure.
static, there's more differential between the prices. I've seen that achieve just as good a revenue results. That said, I've got clients that use dynamic pricing and it works brilliantly for them, particularly if you're capacity constrained, right? And you're
Yes.
on a really minutia of the timed points of the day, right? And you actually have a decent booking curve, because that's the other thing where this plays into it. I think a lot of times people think that maybe dynamic pricing will improve my booking curve, just kind of shop early and save. Whereas I've not seen a lot of that behavioral change in practice. And so I think it's going to continue to be a hot button issue because I think for some people it works, makes sense. The cost makes sense because it's not free to execute dynamic pricing. You're going to pay somebody to do it, or you're going to hire somebody to manage it in house. So that's a cost benefit that I think attractions need to weigh as they look at the upside that they could potentially get. But I think it'll continue to be a hot button issue. I think we'll continue to see attractions go towards it. I think we'll continue to see attractions walk away from it, which I've seen, in some of our client base within the last few years.
Yeah.
But it it's at least becoming more accepted among younger audiences. Like they get it, I think, more so than older audiences. Older audiences are more, they really don't like it. I think it creates a little bit of distrust sometimes for older consumers where I came on, I looked at the price, maybe I did pre-planning, but I didn't purchase until the day before. Now all of a sudden the price is $5 to $10 different maybe than what I purchased, or maybe I'm purchasing on a calendar basis and prices are changing by 50, 75 cents and just doesn't make a lot of sense to consumers. I think that's where you start to see a breakdown in price value, in
Yeah.
value proposition, is where the focus is entirely put on the price point. And so that's all the consumer's thinking about is the price point. And now they're having to make decisions sometimes as little as 25 cents. And does that matter to me? Does it not matter to me? Why is that different? Why is it not different? Um, yeah, I think that there's just some pitfalls associated with dynamic pricing on attractions that you really have to think through before you decide, is that right for me? So I think that's the caution flag that I'd throw up relative to the results that we saw in the research.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because I also think like you said capacity, and then I think if you're in a competitive marketplace too, it works really well.
Yeah, it can.
Right?
Yeah,
It can work really well where, you're also you might have that, but a lot of times, when folks go to buy at attractions, I mean, they're on your website. And
yeah,
so that's what makes me, and you did kind of say that it does affect the value proposition with dynamic pricing for some people, especially the older buyers. I had an experience in Southern California where I had taken my son and his friend out to California for his birthday, and his mom had sent me $80 to take him to a park because she had looked online, and then um, I went to buy the tickets maybe the next morning, and it was $20 more, which is quite a lot. Like I
Yeah.
didn't want to go back to this kid's mom and say, "Hey, I need another twenty
Right.
dollars." So we just made it happen. But you know, I don't know. Maybe I'm one of those older buyers, but to me, it was just like, darn it. We thought we were gonna. Yeah, it made for an uncomfortable buying experience. So that's where, as a consumer, I can appreciate what you're saying about buyers and maybe not trusting the value. I'm curious though, if the data says anything about, with regards to the results for the attractions,
Hmm.
do we see that dynamic pricing is generating more dollars than value pricing? Or even you mentioned uh, variable pricing. So variable pricing, just in case anybody doesn't understand, and I want to make sure I'm clear. You're saying like maybe you have a weekday price versus a weekend price or a
Right.
holiday
Yeah.
price. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, so you're utilizing variable pricing points, right, based on likely seasonality and where you think you can take pricing and where you have the demand to take it, right, based on, your general sense of kind of elasticity of your
sure.
market that I think a lot of operators have. Um, but yeah, I think that one of the things that you said really is important is from a consumer's perspective. And that is one of the things that I learned from my mentors who founded our company, Tony Newkirk and Scott Sanders, who are former Disney executives, is that in all decisions that you're making as it relates to revenue strategy, as it relates to guest experience, as it relates to industrial engineering planning, you want to lead with the consumer. So lead with the consumer in mind, view it from the consumer's lens. And if you're putting additional roadblocks, you're adding confusion into the process, that can be a challenge. So I think if you are utilizing dynamic pricing, it's really important, prices starting at, being more really transparent around what the pricing is, why, right? I think people understand capacity constrained environments. But I think that leading with the consumer is can you make it make sense for your consumer? If you can make it make sense for your consumer and it's going to drive incremental revenue and you've done the math and you've done your homework, then fantastic. By all means, pull the trigger. But I think it's important to ask, is this going to make sense to my consumer?
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. That's actually a great way to look at it. I'm curious though, for maybe some of the finance leaders that might be watching, how should these changes that you're seeing in consumer behavior affect their forecasting, or should it even affect their forecasting over the next 12 to 24 months?
Yeah, I think that there's always this temptation to say, like, well, if consumers are pulling back, we're going to pull back on marketing or we're going to cut some cost, right? I think a lot of times in those scenarios where you're having to fight harder for the share of wallet are times where you maybe want to lean in and, not cut marketing if you can afford to, and really charge ahead and really kind of try to forge your own path. I think that it's great to be aware of the environment, but don't go, yanking back on cost immediately just because you get panicked. I think what I see that's really effective as it relates to forecasting, and again, kind of shout out to my two mentors, Joni and Scott, who leveraged it at Disney along with others, is to think about code forecast as a code. So, like, are you forecasting right down the middle based on every piece of information 50% chance you miss it, 50% chance you hit it, exceed it versus fall short? Are you leveraging a code 5 forecast? But then in your back pocket, what's your code 3 forecast, which would mean a 70% chance you exceed it, 30% chance you fall short. So that's your conservative run, right? It's if
Yeah.
this initiative doesn't play out, if our competitor ends up really gangbusters after they open that new location down the street next year, right? If these kind of exogenous factors as it relates to the economy play out, this may be where we end up. And by the way, if that's where we're going to end up, here are the 3, 4, 5 things we can do to go try to make it up. And then you can also know, hey, what's my code 7, my optimistic forecast, right? If these initiatives really crush it, if our competitor falls flat on that new location down the street, what does that look like? And really having a range of kind of outcomes in your back pocket and kind of understanding what the initiatives are and what the triggers are that you pull given those outcomes. And so that's a lot of times what I do when I'm talking with financial kind of planners within the attraction space, and I coach them on as relates to forecasting, is to really have some, what are my options and what are my potential outcomes? Call it right down the middle always, but really know what's my upside, what's my downside, and then what am I going to do if I end up in that situation?
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting. You said lean into it, right? One of my mentors, he famously says, we in business create our own economies, right? And just kind of to your point, I think when we see that the data maybe isn't saying the things that we want to hear for this season, it's also, like you said, it's a good time to lean into it because some of your competition is going to be backing off, right? So if you're the attraction that keeps pushing forward, I think there's a real opportunity there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
I can appreciate what you said about leaning into it. And so, that also kind of brings me to my next question when we talk about what's happening in today's consumer behavior. We really can't talk about it without talking about AI because everybody's using it, or at least everybody says they're using it. I'm pretty sure
Right.
everybody's using it. Using it to some degree. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. I see a lot of things where people are upset about people using it, but I don't think I know a person who isn't using it. And I mean, I'll tell you, even just to have this procedure that I had, I went to AI and said, "Find me the best surgeon,"
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
And
it
people are
did.
doing that with attractions every single day. What
Yes,
is the best X? I'm going to this city. This is who I'm going with, or this is what the
yes,
kind of things I enjoy. What should I do? Or I want to go to this type of attraction. What's the best one? Right. I mean, I think that a lot of people are doing that and using that. And that's the kind of rapid adoption that we saw over the last year. And I think it's critical for attractions to really understand where they fall in that discoverability, right? If your pricing, if your experience, if your location, if all of these elements that are so critical on your website and in social and in reviews and all these things that AI is scraping to try to generate these recommendations, you've got to be in those places. I think it's only a matter of time. I don't know how good for the industry it'll be, but it was only a matter of time before we're actually purchasing, I think, through AI. And I think that some of these platforms found a way to monetize third party ticketing. And
yeah.
so,
Oh, I agree.
I think like it's coming.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? It's interesting you bring that up because in ticketing, and I've been in ticketing for 25 years. I do see a future coming where they're not even going to go to a website. They're just going to say, "Give me 5 tickets to this attraction on Friday."
Yeah.
I mean, and then when I look at how my kids are purchasing things online right now, that's how they're doing it, right? Siri, find me toothpaste,
Right.
and and even my Alexa asked me, if she can order for me today, right? So I think we're definitely going to see that changing, and I think that's an interesting future that we're looking towards. I also I think it's interesting because you kind of answered my next question with regards to how do these attractions get that visibility on AI, and what do you see being the biggest barrier preventing operators from using AI effectively right now? Is it technology, data? Is it just their knowledge of it?
I think it's knowing whether or not it's the right thing to do and whether to be cautious about it. I think that's the big barrier for people right
Sure.
now. And I think people should be cautious about it. What we recommend is don't go out and try to leverage Gemini or Chat GPT to tell you what your pricing strategy should be. Because if that's what you're doing, there's somebody else down the street doing the exact same thing, and you're just going to end up doing the exact same stuff, right? Like, I think that you will continue to see organizations that use humans for copywriting be more successful than organizations who use AI for copywriting. I think that there's just
Sure.
an emotional resonance there that will continue to be real and that people will really want. I think where people can start to look at AI, particularly as it relates to like marketing side of the business, which is something we looked at, is where can you, can you break down processes, right? Are you using some of these artificial intelligent targeting tools where you're describing the strategy, you're saying who to go target, you're giving it the emotive responses to go look for. The machine's doing some learning, maybe some A/B testing, but you're still kind of the master of your own destiny in a way. I think that's, how do you drip feed some of these tools within your organization? If you're using AI for external communications, I think you got to be really careful. Interestingly, we saw that people weren't averse to AI in media. We tested AI versus non AI, which is kind of a dystopian thing to even think about. Like, what is non AI?
Sure.
Do we call it human? Like, what do we call that? But we tested both. People weren't adverse. In some instances, we actually put together some pretty good AI ads that generated a better response. But I think that the important thing to remember about those is they were heavily coached, right? And it's not going to be right for every attraction. If you're a zoo and you're out using AI imagery of animals, like shame on you. You have everything you need in
Yes.
your backyard, right? Like that's what you want to go put in front of your guest. Um, but it may work in some instances, right? It maybe work to get that face a little more smile to it, to get that lighting a little better, right? There may be some elements of AI that you can leverage to enhance. But you want to drip feed those types of strategies. You don't want to go full blown because you want to be able to understand if your market's going to react negatively to it. Because we have seen it where people go out and they leverage it, all of a sudden you've got three-fingered humans and two-headed ducks, and people are wondering where is this and where did you put it together?
Yeah, and I've heard stories. There's been some controversy with attractions using things like that because I think a friend of mine who does plane, like old planes,
Mm-hmm.
and they had AI do an image. They worked for museums who had these older planes, and they had AI do kind of a replica. And even though they said it was a replica with AI, the general public didn't respond very well to it because they knew that they had these planes available at the museum, which I think is interesting what you're saying. You know, when you're a zoo, you have the animals,
Right.
and I think there is something to be said. I mean, being a CEO of a company who has this show, right? You know, one of the things that and strategies that we've tried to use is, to let people know that there are humans in front of these businesses.
Yeah.
And so it's very interesting that you say that because, at the end of the day, people buy from people,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, when we use AI, especially with guests, how do you see it being used with regards to like personalizing the experience without making communication feel less personal? Because that's where I think that, especially with this data that we have,
Yeah.
we can use it to personalize the experience, maybe even make the experience easier on the guests.
Yeah, I think there's probably some novel ways that I'm sure people have this technology solution already, and if they're not, they're pretty close to it in terms of itinerary building, recommendation engines for what you may want to do that are AI driven, chatbots that are AI driven around like I'm interested in this, or hey, is the monkey enclosure open today? Yes or no, kind of stuff. Yeah, I think that we'll see more of that and more ability to leverage tools like that. They'll just become more ubiquitous, I think, throughout the attraction space. Kind of like now, a lot of before, kind of to have your own map app was a little bit more niche and only the bigger destinations had it. Now that software has now become available through a number of vendors who can do that type of a thing. And so I think we'll see more of that AI kind of how do you embed that within your own information, within your own data? How do you really embed that within your own segmentation to speak to your consumers once they do engage with you or once they do engage with your attraction or once they are on site trying to figure out what they're going to do for the day.
It's interesting. We had one of our attraction partners implemented this. It was a chat bot, but also a phone agent, right? And they were willing to try it out, which I really appreciate about those parks that are innovative and willing to try something like that out.
Yeah.
What they saw that was interesting to me is, they were able to record the data of how many people were calling and hanging up prior to having this agent. And now those calls were longer, people were sticking with it, they were waiting to get the information. The only issue we had the first time we launched it is we had one agent that helped somebody do their taxes. So we had to limit like what kind of information the agent had access to. But this is the challenge with, learning. I mean,
Yeah.
everything's moving so fast with
Yeah.
AI. It wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It was a young kid that called up and he had questions about how the tax code worked, and she was all too happy to help him.
That's so funny. That's so great.
Now,
What a
if they
great
if they
story.
weren't being charged by the minute, I mean, it was
Well,
very
that's the other
minimal.
thing, and that's
Right.
it. Well, I will say, and that's the thing that we've heard, and attractions probably aren't facing this yet, but a lot of other large corporations that leverage AI is the cost of tokens, right? These tokenized
Yeah.
AI platforms and how expensive that can get really quickly if you just cut your organization loose and say, yes, everybody has access
Yes.
now, go, and then you're actually being monetized and charged for that. Those expenses can get astronomical very quickly. And so I do give people some caution there, but I think a lot of attractions aren't in
Well, and
that
I think it goes back to what you said.
ChatGPT for $20 a month or something. But
Yeah, and I think it also goes back to what you said about having clear prompts, right?
yeah,
Just the clearer the prompt, the better the output, and I think that's something
it's a
that's
skill
important
set.
to mention. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's a skill set. It's not a silver bullet that says I'm gonna, never have to pay for a human face to take a picture again. No, I don't necessarily think that's the right. That's certainly not what we would recommend. I think it's something that requires more research. I think as we continue to do these types of nationwide studies, it'll be something we continue to drill in on to really try to understand how do people react to AI and media.
Yeah. Well, I hope as you get that data, you come back here because this is fascinating. This
Happy to.
conversation is has been fascinating. Well, if you're okay, I know we're wrapping up towards the end of the show. I do want to talk a little bit about, or just ask maybe what are two or three pieces of data that every attraction should understand about their guest.
Oh yeah. Guess that you should be doing guess that everyone should be doing guess that, and there's a numerous ways to do guess that at a low cost scale, from intercepts to follow-up surveys. Everyone should be doing guess that, and ideally you're asking some type of question around price value. That'd be one. Two, you should be leveraging all of your ticketing data for forecasting, but it is so critical, and you guys know this because you're a ticketing platform, to correctly categorize your data. Spend the time to have the right data structure, the right data warehouses, to have all your tickets appropriately named. Change the name when it's a different ticket product. Don't just copy over the ticket product and make it fall 2026 special number two, right? Like actually
Yes.
leverage the power of the data you have. And to do that, you need good, structured, really well managed data. And then I think the last thing is forecasting. I think, you everyone should be doing forecasting. If you're not making decisions based on forecasting, every forecast is wrong, by the way, right? That's the great thing about forecasts. They're all wrong, and it's the scale of
Sure.
incorrectness that matters, right? But if you're not leveraging your forecasting and trying to do that to understand when you need to pull levers for revenue, when you need to pull levers for cost, it's an ongoing, never-ending process. It helps you to understand how pricing changes have been accepted by the marketplace. It helps you understand and measure against marketing initiatives. So I'd say guess that with some price value, very clean data, and then use it to forecast.
And I did not pay him to say that. That is, I mean, I agree with you. And I think that kind of makes me think a little bit about, what when we look at like executives who are looking at new research, right? So you've got executives of these organizations looking at the new research, how quickly should they react? When is not quick enough? And are they, do you find sometimes that they're cherry picking the data that supports to what they want to do versus what they should be doing?
I think that there's a way to overcome that, and it's through like process. And I think it starts with having a sound forecast, and then from that it becomes measurement and constant communication, and it becomes bringing everyone into the picture. So it's having marketing, it's having the financial analyst, it's having the pricing team, it's having the executive team, it's having operators, it's having every one of your kind of core leadership team honed in and understanding here's where we are, here's where we're performing. If we're under, these are the levers we're going to go pull. If we're over, these are the levers we're going to go double down on. And I think it becomes, whether that's a bi-weekly meeting every 3 weeks, once a month, it's at least once a month. Really understanding where your business performance is, where your guest sat performance is versus the KPIs that you've established, and whether that's based on history or that's based on goals is up to you as an organization, or a little bit of both. But yeah, I think it's about bringing the team together. We call it revenue driver meetings. It's a
Yeah.
process that we've developed with a lot of clients and implemented, and we've seen it be extremely successful at keeping everybody moving in the same direction and rowing in cadence.
I love that. Actually, I love that. What before we and like I said, we're getting close to the end. I have so many questions for you. This is really hard to wrap this up because I know that there are a lot of attractions watching today, and of all the things that you have in this 2026 Leisure Consumer Survey, if there are three things that they should remember from today's conversation, what would that be?
Oh yeah. So think about when you think about your pricing and your promotional strategy, think about the overall cost to visit, not just your ticket price. Consumers are looking at the overall cost of visit. They're thinking about the bundled cost of everything. So when you think about value proposition, think about the overall cost to visit and how are you leveraging bundling in your packaging and promotional strategy. I think that's going to be really critical for a lot of attractions right now. I think the second would be the conversation that we had around value proposition, and is value proposition at the core of your pricing strategy. And then I think the third would be, in regardless of what you're doing, whether you're working in marketing, whether you're working in guest experience, or whether you're the controller on the back end, everything that you should do as an attraction should be led with the consumer in mind. And I think that is the path towards success in a lot of instances, is leading with the consumer.
Yeah, I love that. I love that's where we're going to wrap up this show today. So, most importantly, how spoiled is Luna?
Oh, incredibly spoiled. She's a bed sleeper, so it's a problem. It's a problem. Incredibly spoiled. She came home with kennel cough, so from the time she was a puppy, she's been in our arms and specially taken care of, and now she thinks she's still a tiny little dog, even though she's an 85-pound Weimaraner. But incredibly spoiled dog.
I love that. I told you I love dogs, so I had to ask that question. I told you we were going to get to it, right? Well,
I
Stephen,
love it.
I know everybody watching today um, who wants to dig into the research. I mean, I think most of us want to be successful at what we're doing as attractions and where we're going as an industry. And so, for everybody watching, listening today that wants to dive deeper into this research, what is the best way that they can connect with you to learn more about integrated insights, and where can they find the 2026 Leisure Consumer Study Survey?
Yeah. So the study is available via download. It's a PDF download on our website. You'll see it at the top right-hand corner. Integratedinsight.com is where you can reach us. I'm on LinkedIn as well, of course, if anybody wants to connect that way, if you prefer it. And then there's a big red contact button in the top right-hand corner of our website if you want to get at us and learn anything else, or how we might be able to support you in any way.
Well, thank you, Stephen. I really appreciate all the data that you shared today. Like I said, this is as somebody who works with a lot of data, and I'm glad that you, like I said, I did not pay him to say that to pay attention to your ticketing data because I agree. I think there is a lot of information that we can use to learn not only about our individual attractions, but where we're going. And I think tools like what you're providing with this study and how you're helping attractions access this information and make better decisions, because I think at the end of the day that's really what we're hoping, is that we have the information to make the best decisions about the future of these organizations.
Yeah, everybody wants to be successful, right? And
Yeah.
how do I set myself up for success? And it's so I've worked with dozens of attractions. I've had the privilege to work with just about every major attraction family that there is, and small family-owned amusement parks at the Universal Resorts worldwide. So I think that they're all unique, right? There's very few times that there's a one size fits all to every single attraction, depending on where you are in that space, whether an FEC or a zoo or an aquarium, right? Um, but I think there's something in this report that can give some boost to, I think, just about anybody.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you guys sharing that with all of us, and I appreciate you being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Stephen. See you soon.
See ya.
Well, I obviously enjoyed that conversation. I'm kind of a nerd for data though, but I think the biggest takeaway, at least for me, in today's conversation is not necessarily that data doesn't make the decision for us, right? It gives us better information to make the decisions that we need to make. And in this industry where consumer experiences and expectations are quickly changing, we can't keep building our strategies around what guests wanted years ago. And we have to listen and we have to measure. And sometimes we have to be willing to discover what we thought was right and what might be wrong, right? And truthfully, like, I do feel like understanding what went wrong is just as valuable. So before I let you guys go today, I just want to again thank Gate Master and let you know that at Gate Master we do believe that, and have believed for more than 30 years, that data is an important part of your decision making, that technology should help operators understand the entire guest journey, not just the process of transactions. And when your ticketing, your POS, your food and beverage, your retail, your memberships, and your guest data all talks to each other and you have information, you can get a much clearer picture of the person behind the purchase, because ultimately better data should help us create better experiences. And there are people behind these experiences, people who are joining us for these experiences. So I want to thank everyone. Speaking of people, I want to thank everyone who joined us live today. And at the beginning of this show, I really did mean what I said, that, I'm 2 days post surgery and I really want to be here with you. I would have missed you all if I hadn't been able to make this show today. So I know that what we're building with this community, this Live with Sondra community, is something that I'm so grateful for. And I'm continuing to show up for all of these conversations because, that was just an amazing conversation that we had today. Thank you again, Stephen, for that. I also want to give a special shout out to our podcast listeners. If you're listening on any of the podcast channels, I want to thank you for being here with us today and would love to hear what you think. And if you are joining us today live for this episode, if you liked this episode and you'd like to subscribe to Live with Sondra, please do subscribe to the Live with Sondra YouTube channel. Share this episode with friends and leaders in the attraction industry that you think need to hear this conversation. I think this was a really good conversation. Actually, there's nobody that doesn't need to hear this conversation. So share this conversation. I'm Sondra, and this is Live with Sondra. Till next time.